The next chapter in this aerial war is about to be written. Even if Russia builds up its forces, and in the future does it, it's got a fundamental flaw. Russia has adapted with a crude, terrifying brutality. Welcome to another edition of The Sun's Battle Plans Exposed. In this episode, we are looking at one of the most significant and puzzling stories of the 21st century. The battle for the skies over Ukraine. When this war began, the world expected a blitzkrieg from the heavens. Russia's air force, the VKS, was seen as a modern behemoth, second only to the United States. Ukraine's a forgotten relic of the Soviet Union. The script was written: total Russian air supremacy in 48 hours. But that script was torn to shreds. For more than 2 years, the skies have been fiercely contested. So why did the sleeping giants stumble? How has Ukraine's outnumbered air force survived and fought back? Tonight, we're going to look deep into the doctrine, the technology, and the brutal reality of the air war in Ukraine. So let's look at some of the stuff that's going on the front line. So here we have a Ukrainian drone attacking and destroying a Russian BM-27, a long-range rocket system, a bit like their HIMARS, but not as good, and showing that drones are still the main aerial method of attack within the Pokrovsk region, but also elsewhere. But it shows that the Russians are still building up with heavy equipment. In our next video, we have the Russians attacking with what are reported as glide bombs, and we'll come on to that in a moment, a Ukrainian headquarters, and we can see the massive explosions that are destroying what is assessed as that headquarters. And our final video has got more Russian glide bombs attacking what are supposed to be command and control positions for the Ukrainian forces, as we can see on the other side of a river. These glide bombs are significant in the effect that they're having on the front line. Let's have a look at the Russian troop movements that are going on in Ukraine at the moment. So on the map here, we have Crimea, occupied by Russia since 2014, with Kherson and the Kherson Oblast, south of the Dnipro River, occupied by Russia. We've got the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, of which Russia has captured about 2/3 of it. And then we've got the disputed Donbass region going further up, with the Donetsk Oblast, part of it occupied since 2014, part of it captured by the Russians, part of it that UK Defence Intelligence suggests it will take the Russians another 4 years and 2 million personnel to capture. Okay, so we've got troops reportedly building up in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Zaporizhzhia is important because Russia's only captured part of the oblast. Zaporizhzhia city itself is significant and controls access across the Dnipro. And of course, we then can gain access up into Dnipro town itself. This Dnipro River, the river that flows down from Kyiv throughout the delta into the Black Sea, is critical when it comes to this conflict. In the early days, I assessed that the Russians would want to try and capture the whole of this eastern bit. It is a significant obstacle for them doing it. But as the troops build up for a possible attack into this area that they don't hold, is that attack likely? Is it possible? What are the details behind it? Or is Russia's main effort still in the Pokrovsk region? I believe Pokrovsk in the east is Russia's main effort, and the build-ups that we're seeing in this region here are to try and split the Ukrainian defensive postures to make sure that they can't concentrate their forces in any one particular area and need to keep something in reserve to deal with any potential Russian incursions. Of course, along the whole of the front line, Russia is probing. It's trying to create the conditions for a breakthrough that we'll examine again in a moment that they had a couple of weeks ago just north of Pokrovsk. So we've talked about this a couple of times. Pokrovsk in a cauldron where Russia is trying to surround it and close the sides of the cauldron in to isolate the Ukrainian troops that are stuck there. Ukraine has been defending it bravely for over a year now. This is another Bakhmut for the Russians. The Russians have been doing everything they can to try and close these edges of the cauldron in. And a couple of weeks ago, they launched a very ambitious raid that got through Ukrainian defences and penetrated tens of kilometres into Ukrainian-held territory. They found a way through. They moved in to produce a couple of salients up towards Vesele, but that's where they stopped. They clearly hadn't planned this in detail, because whenever you break through a defensive line, you need a follow-on force. So you create a toehold. You turn that toehold into a foothold. You turn that foothold into a bridgehead. And that bridgehead, you then use your forces to break out from it, as the Allies did in Normandy after D-Day. The Russians couldn't produce sufficient mass to take that toehold into a foothold, into a bridgehead, and then to exploit it. The Ukrainians responded with their new military structures. Their Azov Corps. The Corps provided a manoeuvre capability, and they used one of their manoeuvre brigades to come in and to cut off the Russian advances and to blunt what it was that we're trying to do and isolate the Russians that had moved into Ukrainian-held territory. And there's increased reporting to suggest that that manoeuvre capability is cutting more than just the head off the Russian incursion, but cutting off some of the elements that are the edges of the cauldron that the Russians were trying to close. More will develop on that over the days and weeks to come. But why do I say it's the Russian main effort on the ground? It's because the Russians have invested so much time, so many personnel into trying to capture this area, and Pokrovsk is key to the capture of the rest of the Donetsk Oblast. The Donetsk Oblast is the one element where Russia doesn't own everything that's in the disputed Donbass region. Vladimir Putin himself has put this as something that is critically important for him. And that is why the indicators suggest that this will remain Russia's main effort in its battle to try and push the Ukrainians. Of course, UK Defence Intelligence has said to move from Pokrovsk through the rest of the uncaptured element of the Oblast could take at least 4 years, and another 1.9 to 2 million personnel dead or wounded on the Russian side. And they've based those calculations on the rate of advance that the Russians have made since their full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Even if Russia builds up its forces, and in the future does it, it's got a fundamental flaw. It's air power and the way it uses it. So let's focus on the air power and the air war. And let's start with the cold, hard numbers, because on paper, this was never a fair fight. Pre-war, the Russian Aerospace Forces, or VKS, boasted an active fleet of over 4,000 aircraft. This included hundreds of their most advanced jets, the Su-35 Flanker, a master of air-to-air combat, the Su-34 Fullback, a potent fighter bomber, and the versatile Su-30. They had recent combat experience from their intervention in Syria and had supposedly spent years modernizing. In contrast, Ukraine had perhaps 100 operational Soviet-era jets. The expectation was a swift, overwhelming air campaign that would leave Ukraine blind, deaf, and defenseless. To understand why that didn't happen, we first need to understand the rule book, the very doctrine of air war. And here, Russia and the West play by two completely different sets of rules. Western and NATO doctrine, perfected since the Gulf War, prioritizes one thing above all else: air superiority. Before you do anything else, you dominate the sky. The first wave of any campaign is a mission called SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. You use stealth aircraft, electronic warfare jets, and long-range missiles to systematically hunt down and destroy every enemy radar, every air defense missile launcher on the ground. And only when you own the skies do you then bring in your bombers and your ground attack aircraft to support the army. Of course, keeping any enemy air force at a distance so that they can't interdict and affect that. It is a methodical top-down approach. Russian doctrine, however, is fundamentally different. It has its roots in the Soviet era, where the Air Force is often seen as a tool of the army, essentially a flying artillery. Its primary job isn't to control the whole of the sky, but to directly support the ground troops advancing below. They rely heavily on their own ground-based air defence systems to protect their forces, creating a protective bubble. This doctrinal difference is the single most important reason for what happened next. In the opening days, Russia didn't launch a coordinated SEAD campaign, and the opening days were Russia trying to take Kyiv, coming in from the north and from the northeast, focusing on Kyiv, focusing on Kyiv Hostomel airport. They didn't systematically hunt Ukraine's air defences. Instead, they followed their doctrine. They supported a massive ground invasion. We saw this most dramatically at the assault on Hostomel airport just outside Kyiv. Russia sent in dozens of helicopters in a daring air assault. This was how you would expect to take a capital city, coming in to take the Hostomel airfield. But they flew directly into a hornet's nest of Ukrainian air defenders who were waiting for them. The Russians hadn't suppressed them. They hadn't used their air force to protect the ground, to put an air defence bubble that they owned around the airspace over Kyiv and elsewhere. The Russian helicopters were flying into a trap. Russian jets flew low-level bombing runs, but without proper intelligence. They often used unguided dumb bombs, flying predictable routes, and they were picked off by the Ukrainian fighters and ground-based missiles. It was a shocking underperformance, a direct result of a doctrine that failed to appreciate the resilience and sophistication of Ukraine's defences. Of course, it helped Ukraine that they'd been pre-warned as to what the Russians were doing. So how did Ukraine shield hold? They executed a textbook integrated air defence system, or IADS. Think of it as a multi-layered net. At low altitude, you have thousands of soldiers with shoulder-fired missiles like the Stinger and mobile gun systems like the German Gepard, lethal to helicopters and low-level flying jets. In the mid-tier, you have systems like NASAMS, capable of knocking down cruise missiles and drones. And at the very top, you have the long-range systems, Ukraine's own Soviet-era S-300s and the game-changing US Patriot. Crucially, Ukrainian commanders were brilliant. They never kept their systems only in one place. They constantly moved their missile launchers, a tactic known as shoot and scoot, making them incredibly difficult for Russia to find and destroy. Aided by pinpoint intelligence from NATO, they created a deadly, invisible web that Russia's Air Force simply could not break through. This lethal environment forced a change in tactics from both sides, accelerating a global shift towards unmanned warfare. We're seeing drones and missiles replacing manned aircraft for the most dangerous jobs. Why risk a $50 million jet and a highly trained pilot when a $500 FPV drone can take out a tank? Russia has saturated Ukraine with Iranian-supplied and Iranian-designed Shahed 136 and 131 suicide drones and its own Lancet loitering munitions. At the same time, it constantly unleashes barrages of Caliber cruise missiles from its Black Sea fleet and air-launched cruise missiles launched from over Russia, and Iskander ballistic missiles being fired from the ground. These have become the primary tools for striking deep behind Ukrainian lines, a role historically reserved for manned bombers. So while its tactical jets are kept at arm's length, Russia's strategic bomber fleet remains a potent weapon. These are the giants of the sky, the iconic propeller-driven Tu-95 Bear and the sleek, supersonic Tu-160 White Swan. Their primary role is to carry Russia's nuclear arsenal, but they have different fleets, one dedicated to its nuclear arsenal, the other dedicated to launching conventional weapons against Ukraine. In this war, we are seeing the primary use of those that are launching the conventional weapons, to fire long-range conventional cruise missiles like the KH-101 from the safety of Russian airspace, hundreds of miles from the Ukrainian border, outside any Ukrainian air defense bubble. Every time one of these bombers takes off, it is a strategic message. It's Russia reminding the world of its nuclear capability, using its ultimate deterrent to deliver conventional blows. Closer to the front, we have Russia's helicopter fleet. Advanced attack helicopters like the Ka-52 Alligator. It's got two contra-rotating rotor blades on top. The Mi-28 Havoc. Both are fearsome tank killers, armed with guided missiles and cannons. After the catastrophic losses at Hostomel, their tactics changed. They now hug the ground, flying at treetop level to hide from radar before popping up to unleash their weapons and diving for cover. But they remain incredibly vulnerable. The Alligator, despite its advanced optics, has proven susceptible even to basic shoulder-fired missiles. Russia has lost hundreds of helicopters and a devastating blow to its ability to provide close air support for its ground troops. They're a vital asset, but a fragile one. Faced with a stalemate in the sky, Russia has adapted with a crude, terrifying brutality. An effective weapon, the glide bomb. They take a massive old Soviet-era bomb, the FAB-500, it weighs half a ton, and they bolt on a simple pop-out wing kit and a GPS guidance system. Well, it's using the Russian equivalent of GPS, but it's called UMPK. Their Su-34 fighter bombers can release these from 50 kilometers away, far outside the reach of the most capable of Ukraine's air defenses. The bomb then glides silently to its target, almost flying in. It isn't precise, but it doesn't have to be. It's more accurate than a dumb bomb being launched, but it suits the Russians' needs. Its sheer explosive force can level buildings, as we have seen, turn fortified bunkers into craters. We have to remember that most bunkers and trenches in the front line are designed to deal with bullets being fired at them so the troops can hide in them and don't get hit by the bullets, to deal with mortar rounds or artillery fire coming in, which are measured in kilogram or tens of kilograms of explosives. But with these glide bombs, have got hundreds of kilograms of explosives going in. That is something that no trench system can survive. And the blast from the overpressure for troops that are in the trenches will have a huge effect on them, killing many. It is a weapon of terror and attrition, used to pound Ukrainian cities and frontline positions into submission. And it's Russia's grim solution to its failure to control the skies. The battle for the skies over Ukraine has been a story of shocking miscalculation, incredible ingenuity, and brutal adaptation. Russia's mighty air force was humbled by a well-executed defence and its own doctrinal flaws. Now, with Ukraine set to finally receive additional Western F-16 jets, the next chapter in this aerial war is about to be written. There was a lot of talk about if we'd just given the Ukrainians F-16 from the very start, then they would have had much more success. But what we don't realise is you can take the most experienced Ukrainian fighter pilots and put them in an F-16 and they can take it off and they can probably land it 8 times out of 10. But to learn to fly it properly takes months of training. Flying it properly is different to fighting it properly. And to learn to fight it properly and to fight it with the numbers of aircraft together that you need takes years of practice. This war is coming close to its 4th year. The Ukrainians are getting their F-16s. They did not want to risk the limited number of airframes, but more importantly, the limited number of pilots who've been trained to fly them, fight them, and are building up that experience that's needed for the future. And how do I know the complexities? I'm an army man. When I was at Staff College, I was very fortunate to fly in the back seat of a twin-seater Harrier jump jet. We always used to use the RAF as a bit of fun. We would have gentle banter about their role and thought that being a pilot was easy. I learned very quickly on that day just how difficult it was. We flew a bombing mission from Norfolk in England down into South Wales against a railway tunnel. Not real, all practice. The weather was terrible and I was trying to keep up with the pilot using a paper map on my knee. The pilot was using a paper map on his knee. I was probably 10 to 15 seconds behind him in our locations. That is miles and miles. and trying to keep up with what was going on and everything that is coming in through the sensors in the aircraft, through the communications of the aircraft, through what's going on the ground. And this was without the aircraft telling us that it was being lit up by air defense radars, by people firing flak and machine guns and missiles at us from the ground, without having to coordinate with other aircraft at the same time. It's a complex mission, and the amount of information that is coming in, and we have to remember the Harrier jump jet, a sophisticated jet for its time, is not the same as an F-16 and is not in the same league as the 5th generation or coming 6th generation aircraft. That is why it takes a long time to learn not just to fly it. I had 35-40 minutes hand on stick time flying the Harrier jump jet. I didn't have to take it off, I didn't have to land it, but I flew it for a bit. I couldn't fight it. Hats off to the pilots that do this, but the complexities of fighting modern aircraft are very easy to dismiss. That's all now on the Sun's Battle Plans Exposed. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and secrets of modern warfare. Now, please put your comments below. If you've got anything you want us to look at, again, put them in the comments and we'll try and fit them in. But for now, goodbye.